Chapter 13. There were more security measures within the fence. More security guards in red and black uniforms stood about watching. Matching the speed of the other passengers, Holly walked steadily forward and stood in another line where everyone was again briefly searched. A security official came out with a dog when Holly stood in the next line to get her ticket. Holly held her breath as the dog passed, wondering if someone had given it the bag Holly had gotten from Mrs. Figg and had held it when she was first captured. Maybe the dog could have gotten her scent from the vomit. Did wizards even use dogs for tracking? But the dog gave her only a cursory glance as it sped up the line, checking all the people. Holly breathed a silent sigh of relief as the dog passed. The man behind the counter didn't give Holly a second glance when she asked for her ticket. Holly paid for it using Ravenda's note. Holly considered doing the transaction using her left hand, but finally decided either Ravenda's artwork would work or not. Trying to hide her hand might seem more conspicuous, thus draw more attention to the hand and her. Holly had no idea when that photo had been taken, but remembering her last experience, Holly decided she might be safe enough for a while, even if she was identified. The security wizards had waited until the last minute when Holly was in no position to flee before moving in to collect her. Perhaps that was standard procedure. After getting her ticket, Holly scanned the rest of the station, checking out the emotions present, while looking for a place to sit and wait for her train. She froze. Standing squarely in front of the boarding gate, carefully scrutinizing the ticket of every passenger in line to board the train, was another red and black security officer. But this one was a wizard. His Slytherin-like emotions shouted out loudly, like a beacon. Holly cautiously sat down near a posted exit next to a friendly-feeling man with blonde hair reading a newspaper. She hoped the people watching her would think she was traveling with him. While sitting, Holly scanned for other wizards. She found a second wizard standing like a sentinel by a red door on one wall. Holly recognized the door with fear. The wizards in security uniforms had dragged her through one like that last time, and then somehow transported her to the wizard security station. Holly closed her eyes and scanned the emotions she felt in the station, in particular, the wizard ones. The wizard by the door was wary and alert, but not expecting. His emotions didn't seem to indicate that he knew Holly was there. The wizard at the gate hadn't seemed to notice Holly either. Holly considered the situation while she sat. With her bangs, short hair, different hair color, and different shirt, the wizard by the door was too far away to recognize her easily. If he remained by the door, he would be of little danger to her, unless something aroused his suspicions. Of more immediate concern was the wizard by the gate. Holly would have to get past him to get into the train. Could she use her invisible cloak and slip on board? Probably not. A solid glass wall stretched parallel along the rails. Its only opening was behind the wizard, and it was too high to easily climb, especially while under a cloak. The dogs would notice her and give alarm for sure if she tried. What about slipping in alongside or behind the wizard? No again. He stood too close to the gate and wall. The wizard would feel her pass for sure. Holly finally concluded the only way to get past him would be to stand in line like everyone else and hope Ravenda's art fooled him. He certainly wouldn't be expecting it. If only there was some way to distract him so he wouldn't get a good look at the mark. Having made up her mind, Holly looked around the station for something to take her mind off of what she would be attempting. She scanned the crowd, checking for unusual emotions or other possible dangers. She could sense nothing, but that was how it had been at the bus station. Posted prominently in view was a huge television screen, which displayed Holly's face alternately with the missing cruise ship on which she was supposed to have information. Other faces appeared occasionally on the television screen, too, people Holly did not recognize. The captions assured viewers that each person displayed was connected with some horrible terrorist act, but Holly now suspected the terrorists were probably fugitive wizards or hapless mudbloods guilty of nothing but the crime of existence. Unable to watch the screen any more, Holly turned to the man next to her. He had finished his newspaper and tucked it under his arm. "Excuse me," said Holly timidly, "but could I borrow your paper to read?" "Certainly," he replied pleasantly, and handed Holly the newspaper. "Thanks," said Holly, taking the newspaper. She unfolded it and stared in disbelief at the huge black headline written there. "Malfoy declares success." Malfoy? Holly read on. "Prime Minister Malfoy jubilantly declares the new anti-terrorist laws have reduced terrorist activities by 50%. New statistics released by Royal Security showed that the reported terrorist activities have dropped by 50% over the last 6 months, indicating that increased Royal Security measures have been saving lives." He thanked the British people for their continued support. Holly studied the photo accompanying the article. It showed a proud man with a pale, pointed face. His blonde hair was neatly sleeked back, and the smile on his face looked a lot like a familiar sneer Holly had seen several times before. Could this be a relative of Scorpius? The man looked a lot like Scorpius, but that would make the Prime Minister a wizard. Not only that, a Slytherin wizard. One who no doubt hated Muggles and mudbloods as much as Scorpius did. How could he be Prime Minister? Holly closed her eyes, trying to remember what she knew of the Malfoys. It wasn't much. Scorpius was an arrogant brat. Hagrid had said something about Scorpius's dad and Cousin Harry being enemies during school, and that Cousin Harry had spoken up in defense of the family at their trial, saying they had had a change of heart towards the end. That meant they must have supported Lord Voldemort at some time. Of course they did. They were Slytherins. But how could he be Prime Minister, too? A wizard in charge of Parliament would make it easier to control the country. But Malfoy? Wouldn't people notice? Holly shook her head in confusion. Holly looked at the other headlines on the page. "Explosion rocks Aylesbury Waterside Theatre. 13 dead. Terrorist suspected. Royal Security Officer decorated. Captures 3 terrorists. Journalist missing. Terrorists suspected." Holly turned the page. "Terrorists apologize." Holly read further. 3 terrorists tearfully confess their crimes. Hear and watch their full confessions online. The newspaper showed the photos of 3 persons, each identified as a terrorist, none of whom Holly recognized. There were other headlines. "Terrorist identified. Tip leads to major terrorist bust. Memorial service to be held for terrorist victims. Royal Security saves family from terrorist threat." How could people believe this stuff, thought Holly dejectedly. It had to be all pure garbage. On the other hand, how could people not believe and still survive? Holly looked to the 3rd page, seeking something besides terrorist topics to read. A photo of a plain-looking man wearing dark-rimmed glasses caught her eye. "Ewan's dead at 48, read the caption. Holly read further. "Eminent scientist Sheridan Ewans died yesterday afternoon at 2:23 p.m. by his own hand after the gloom struck the neighborhood. Ewans had devoted the last 15 years of his life trying to determine a scientific cause for the gloom. Witnesses reported that the gloom struck Ewans' neighborhood around noon and again at 2:20 p.m. yesterday afternoon. Police speculate that the gloom forced Ewans to confront his inabilities as a scientist and, unable to face his failures anymore, he chose to end his life instead. Ewans is best known for his work with radio and sound waves, improving the reception of television and numerous types of sound sets. He is survived by his wife and 3 children. Services with chocolate will be held sometime next week. More details will be announced as soon as the arrangements are completed." Below it was a photo of a man flanked on one side with a woman. They both had wide smiles on their faces. The caption read, "Macklin, acquitted of vehicular manslaughter. The gloom made me do it." Holly turned to another page and scanned the headlines. "Gloomologists predict less gloom during the summer months. Hospital claims record-high visits after last gloom. What babies feel during a gloom. Pregnancy and gloom. School readministers exam after gloom strikes. Homeless center teams with Red Cross to distribute chocolate." Holly turned to the next page. "Top 10 vacation spots in Great Britain. Places least hit by the gloom. Escape the gloom. Cruise ship getaways. New study reveals fish feel the gloom." Gloom service dogs now available. 3 sugar-free chocolate flavors introduced. Chocolate sales up again in the second quarter. Success attributed to a rise in gloom strikes. An ad at the bottom of the page read, "Buy Glumly Insulation. Guaranteed to reduce the effects of gloom by 10%. Holly refolded the newspaper and sat down. It was too depressing to read. Surely there was something else she could do to pass the time. A low rumble in her stomach reminded Holly that she hadn't eaten since before daybreak, and even that hadn't lasted past lunch. She had a small bit of change left over from purchasing her ticket, so Holly got up and walked to a small shop on the other side of the station. Maybe the place had some food she could afford. Holly looked hungrily at the sandwiches in the store, none of which she could afford. She finally selected 2 small chocolate bars within her price range. Holly ate one immediately. It felt good going down, and Holly started to eat the other one too. But then she remembered the Dementor floating around the perimeter of the station, and Ravinda's words about always keeping a bar handy. Holly reluctantly tucked the second bar away for later, just in case. A loud rumble announced the arrival of a train. An intimidating black train with red V's painted on it rolled to a stop alongside the station. Checking the time, Holly realized it was the train she wanted to take. She watched apprehensively as other passengers began to line up to one side of the gate to board. The wizard in the security uniform stood in place, blocking their way. Though Holly couldn't sense any actual guilt coming from any of them, the people in the line were all a bit fearful and worried. Apparently just getting near security made them feel that way. The wizard impassively watched the passengers line up. He was alert and watchful, but not actually suspicious. People started to get off the train. Holly watched as they lined up on the other side of the wall behind the same gate. When no more passengers got off the train, the wizard opened the gate and stepped aside to let the people through. After everyone leaving had passed through the gate, the wizard motioned for the first of the passengers waiting to board to come forward. The first person was a man in a neat business suit. The man felt a bit fearful when approaching the wizard, even though Holly could tell he believed he had nothing to fear from security. The wizard scrutinized the man's ticket carefully before returning it and letting him through. Then the wizard motioned for the next person to come forward. She was an elderly woman, also in a business suit. She stepped fearfully up. Her hand shook a bit as she held out her ticket for the wizard to take. Holly joined near the end of the line. Others crowded up, joining the line behind her. Holly's heart was beating so loudly in her ear that surely the others near would hear it. But no one paid her any attention. Person by person, Holly neared the front of the line. Was it getting warm in the station? Holly drew off her dirty blue sweatshirt and tucked it under her arm. Her relatively clean, bright pink t-shirt beneath caught everyone's eye. Holly noticed several nearby passengers immediately regard her with new interest. That was the idea. No one on the run would wear something so bold. Maybe the wizard on duty would be so busy looking at her shirt that he wouldn't pay attention to her hand. 3 persons. 2 persons. 1. Finally, it was Holly's turn to give the wizard her ticket. Silently, the wizard motioned Holly forward. He regarded her with renewed interest as Holly timidly approached. Was it the pink t-shirt? Probably not. Though her shirt and hair had changed, Holly knew she was still the same approximate age and gender of the person he sought. The wizard would be a fool to not pull her aside for further examination, just on general principles. Holly knew some Slytherins were major idiots, but she couldn't count on this one being one of those idiots. Holly resolutely held out her ticket to the wizard for inspection. She tried to keep her hand steady and hoped the wizard didn't notice its faint tremble or hear her pounding heart. Was she too calm or showing too much fear? Holly didn't know. The wizard took the ticket suspiciously and started to scrutinize Holly carefully, starting with a hand that held the ticket. "Thank you," said Holly suddenly. "What?" said the wizard, disconcerted. He looked abruptly from Holly's hand to her face, and Holly looked back. "Thank you for keeping us safe," said Holly clearly, looking directly into the wizard's black eyes, just as her dad had taught her to do when meeting new people or making apologies. Startled, the wizard looked into Holly's green eyes, and the two stared at each other. No one else had spoken while in line, either to the wizard or to each other. Holly's voice had surprised him, surprised everyone in line that could hear her, and he was clearly disconcerted by her words. The praise was totally unexpected and undeserved. They weren't protecting anyone, as Holly well knew, but that was not something he could admit in public. It was the wizard who looked away first. "Go on," he muttered gruffly while thrusting the ticket back into Holly's hand. "You're holding up the line." "Thank you," repeated Holly softly, politely. She took the ticket and moved slowly forward through the gate. The wizard stood behind her and motioned the next person forward, while still clearly feeling uncomfortable by the encounter. With every step further away from the wizard, Holly's breathing slowed a fraction, but she could still feel and hear her heart wildly pounding ever so loud. Holly clung to the handrail, sagging with relief as she climbed the steps into the nearest compartment. Once inside, Holly moved swiftly to the back end of the car, and then on to the next and the next until she found one empty of people. It was an economy car filled with plain, straight-backed benches that permitted maximum seating and afforded no privacy. Holly ducked down behind the last bench, took out her invisible cloak, and pulled it over herself. She closed her eyes and huddled beneath the cloak, trying to keep quiet. She couldn't seem to stop herself from shaking. Holly may have gotten past the wizard, but for how long? Were there still others? Did they plan to pluck her off the train as they had with her on the bus? The train compartment felt like one huge cage. For the moment, Holly was still free, but she would not feel even remotely safe until she had gotten off the train and was again out in the open. It had been a major gamble to look directly at the wizard, but not totally without logic. When first captured, Wizard Flint had charged Holly with disrespect for looking directly at him. Wizard Pilkington had told Holly to keep her head down and her eyes averted at all times while in the presence of Slytherins. He implied the behavior was taught to Nons while at Hogwarts. Indeed, all the Nons Holly had seen at Hogwarts during her experience 2 years ago had kept their heads down as well. Holly noticed Wizard Pilkington kept his head down while around Wizard Flint, as did the other Nons she passed when Wizard Flint dragged her through the security station. The Slytherin wizard was looking for an escaped Non. He would never expect a Non to look him directly in the eyes. It just wasn't done here. More people came into the car and sat down. Holly heard them coming, but didn't risk sneaking a peek to see who or how many. She didn't budge from her location, and thankfully, no one tried to use the area where she sat to place luggage or bags. The invisibility cloak hid Holly from others, but it also made her blind to outside emotions. Holly was determined to not move or in any way give up her location. She feared there might be wizards patrolling the train, too. A sharp whistle sounded, and then the train rumbled into motion. Holly held her breath and stared anxiously at the seat back in front of her. She scarcely believed the train was really taking off, with her still on it. Perhaps this was all a cruel joke. Surely Wizard Flint had figured out she had an invisibility cloak, and Wizard Pilkington had told them that she was bound for London. Perhaps the wizards planned to swoop in and take her off while the train was still in motion. Maybe they'd seen her come in and put on the invisibility cloak. If they had, then they would know exactly where to find her. The train began to pick up speed. Looking fearfully around, Holly kept the cloak securely over her body and scurried to the opposite side of the car. The racket of the rolling train covered any noise she might have made. If they came for her now, they wouldn't know her exact location. Maybe she would still have a chance to slip away unnoticed. The train slowed. No, thought Holly in a panic. Suddenly the train jolted to a stop. They're coming! Holly looked about frantically for some new place to hide. The whole rail system shut down. The lights went out, and the interior of the train car became dark. Not a sound could be heard. No one spoke. No one moved. Holly waited in dread, not daring to move either. They were coming, and she couldn't stop it. The door slid open. A tall, cloaked figure glided forward. A Dementor. It drew a long, slow, rattling breath, and an intense cold filled Holly. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. The cold went deeper and deeper into the center of her very being. "No!" screamed Holly at the sight of Vernon vanishing. "No, no, 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 no!" she screamed over and over again while pounding the ground in front of the tree stump. "No," she whimpered, all alone in her dorm. "Hide," whispered Holly, frantically feeling Megan's fear as if it were her own. "There was so much blood," said Ravenda hollowly, her overwhelming grief and loneliness again filling Holly. Abruptly, the intense cold ended. The Dementor had left. Holly could breathe again. She found herself kneeling on the floor with tears streaming down her face. Sobbing, she clutched her knees and rocked back and forth, remembering. Dementors and security wizards were everywhere. They'd catch her eventually. How could they not? And then what? She'd never escape again, and they'd never let her live. The situation was hopeless. Impossible. Why bother even trying? Her parents were gone. Vernon was dead or dying. Her friends were all dead. Why was she even alive? Holly could see no reason to keep on going, no reason to live. A short while later, the lights in the car came on. Then the train started a slow rumble forward. While wallowing in her despair, Holly listened in amazement as a shaky voice spoke up from somewhere in the car. "Anyone need some chocolate?" it said. "I have a spare piece." How could anyone think of eating, let alone talk, at a time like this? "Is it sugar-free?" asked a hopeful female voice. Holly remembered that chocolate was supposed to help after a visit from a Dementor. She pulled out her own piece while listening to the conversation on the other side of her bench. "No, sorry," said the voice. Holly's trembling fingers fumbled with the wrapping paper. "Oh," came her dejected voice, "I guess I'll have to make do." "I've some you can share," came another female voice. It was the voice of a younger woman. Holly managed to get the paper off her own chocolate. "Here," said the voice, while Holly took a bite of her chocolate. The soothing warmth was almost instantaneous. Holly immediately felt much better. "Thanks," came a grateful reply. "My doctor says I have to cut down on my sweets no matter how many times I feel the gloom." "Say, this is pretty good." "I know," came the voice. "I like it too. It's one of the new brands they just came out with." "Could I have a bit of that chocolate?" came a new female voice. "It's for my daughter. I already gave her some chocolate," she added in a worried tone, "but I don't think it did any good. She doesn't seem to be snapping out of it." There was a rustle of noise as passengers changed locations. Her own depression momentarily forgotten, Holly slipped off her invisibility cloak. She immediately felt all sorts of worry and concern in the car. There were 17 other people in the car, one barely there. It had the emotion of a very young girl feeling horribly depressed. Worse than Albus, who had wanted to die when he realized his dad was dead. "She doesn't look very good," agreed another voice. Holly recognized the voice as the woman who had wanted sugar-free chocolate. "What did you give her?" "Pediatric chocolate," replied the mother. "That's your problem," replied the sugar-free lady. "Those medicated chocolates have too many vitamins and minerals. They only work with a mild neighborhood gloom, not the kind we get on the rail. You need to stick with straight chocolate. The darker, the better," she added with confidence. "Come on, sweetie," Sugar-Free crooned. "Just a little bite? You'll feel much better afterwards, I promise." "Usually she bounces right back afterwards," said the mother anxiously, "but we've had so much gloom today." "You could be right," observed another male voice. Holly matched a number of aches and pains to the voice. It was obviously an older man. "It looks like she's too sad to eat." "What'll we do?" asked the mother worriedly. "There's no point in stopping the train," said the man who had the extra chocolate. "There's no hospital nearby. Maybe there's a doctor in one of the other cars." "Come on, baby," the mother pleaded. "You can do it. Take another bite." Holly longed to help her, but all she knew about Dementors was eating chocolate afterwards. She didn't know what to do if the chocolate didn't work. Then the old man said something to do with bluebirds and Dover. Didn't make any sense, and the rest of his words were drowned out by the rumble of the train. "What are you doing?" asked the younger lady who had had the extra sugar-free chocolate. "Singing," replied the man. "It's something me mum used to sing to me when the bombs were dropping all around. Your little one can still hear. The song used to make me feel better. Maybe it'll make her feel better." He began to sing again, louder this time. The melody was unfamiliar but lovely. This time Holly could understand the words. "There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see, he continued. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after. Tomorrow, when the world is free. You mustn't sing things like that, said Sugar-Free fearfully. They'll take you away for sure. Why, said the old man disarmingly, it's only a song, an old song. There's no war and no more Nazis. No, agreed the man with the extra candy warily. He didn't really believe that. The Nazis just had another name. And if it'll help the little girl, continued the old man, why not? He began to sing again. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see. The mother joined in, singing with him. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after. Tomorrow, when the world is free. The mother stopped singing, but the old man continued. The shepherd will tend the sheep, the valley will bloom again, and Jimmy will go to sleep in his own little room again. At this point, some of the other passengers joined in as well. It was clear they were familiar with the song, even though they might not sing it. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see. Look, said Sugar-Free excitedly. She's stirring. Come on, baby, said the mother with renewed enthusiasm. Eat some chocolate. Holly suddenly felt warmth spread throughout the little girl's body. That's it, said the mother excitedly, and Holly could feel a surge of relief from her. The feeling of relief spread throughout the car. I hear there's less gloom in the country, commented the kindly voice of a woman from the other side of the car. Yes, I'd heard that too, said the mother. That's why we're visiting my aunt in Tunstall. It's near Woodbridge in Suffolk. She says they hardly ever get the gloom there. I'm hoping the change in scenery will help my Kelly. Kelly now, is it? Asked the old man. What pretty blue eyes you have. Are you feeling better? There was a pause. Then the old man said, That's good. You mustn't let the gloom get you down, he told her. It can't hurt you unless you let it. There was another pause, and then the man asked, What'd she say? She says she'd like to hear about Dover again, replied the mother. Would you? She asked the man. I'm afraid I don't know all the words. I don't mind, replied the old man, but I'll need some help. And he started to sing again. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. The mother sang with him, and soon most of the other passengers in the car sang along too. Listening, Holly realized the people probably knew the news was filled with lies, and not all was as reported. They knew, but could do little about it, not against wizards. Still, they found small ways to resist and live with dignity. The passengers sang the song several times for Kelly. Holly leaned back against the wall of the car and listened to every word of the song. She let the simple melody fill her mind and felt the quiet courage of the passengers surrounding her, their courage becoming her own. Vernon wasn't dead yet. Ravinda had said so, and who should know better than her? There was still Dumbledore's key in whatever lay within the vault. All was not lost. As long as Holly kept on trying, there was still a chance. The train slowed to a stop at the London station. Holly waited until the passengers in the car gathered their things, got up, and left. Then she pulled on her sweatshirt and tucked her invisibility cloak away and cautiously stood up behind the seat. Seeing no one around, she began to make her exit. Once she reached the car opening, Holly immediately scanned for the wizards she expected at the station. Where were they? What were they thinking? She found 3 wizard emotions at the station. One seemed familiar somehow. Holly looked over towards the familiar emotion and up into the eyes of Roland. Holly's excitement at finding someone she knew died almost instantly, for Roland stood next to a red door and wore the familiar red and black of security. For a moment, Holly stared at him in terror before recovering her senses and retreating back into the car where she was hidden. Holly immediately drew out her invisibility cloak and pulled it over her head. She leaned against the side of the car, her heart racing wildly. Roland had recognized her. She knew it. Holly had felt his elation when their eyes met. Roland had been an upper-class student at Hogwarts. They had been friends. But the Roland of this world shouldn't have known Holly. There was only one way Roland could have recognized her here, from that awful photo security had been showing on the news. Roland was in a security uniform. He had recognized her and would no doubt tell the others. Holly blinked back the tears she felt. To be turned in by Roland. Roland was a Hufflepuff. He had been Holly's tutor her first year at Hogwarts and had taught her how to do wizard duels her second. How could he betray her and turn her in? The thought was too horrible to bear. Holly cautiously slid the cloak off her head, keeping the rest of her body covered. Were the wizards already on the train? Perhaps she could find a way to slip off while they were coming on. But there were no wizards on the train that she could tell. Holly moved as close to the entrance as she dared. Where were the wizards now? To her surprise, they hadn't moved. Keeping hidden, Holly focused and scanned their emotions again. Roland was worried and upset. The security guard next to him was bored. The wizard security guard holding open the gate letting passengers through was also bored. That could only mean Roland hadn't said anything to them. Holly couldn't understand why, but she had to take advantage of the situation while she could. She hastily drew the invisibility cloak back over her body and stood up. Then Holly quickly jumped off the train, trusting that the noise of the engine would cover any sound she might make. She hurried to join the other passengers and slipped through the gate. Holly watched the wizard anxiously as she passed. To her horror, saw him turn and stare directly at her. Not only that, but his look was expectant, like he was waiting for her. Panicked, Holly froze in place. How could he have known? Suddenly, a low growl sounded behind her. Holly whirled to see a guard dog and security officer coming right at her. She hurriedly moved forward and out of the dog's way. The dog continued to growl while changing his direction, moving towards Holly. He tugged at his leash, but the security guard hastily pulled the dog back, no doubt thinking it was growling at the wizard. The guard and dog passed the wizard and went through the gate. Adrenaline flooded through Holly at the detection by the dog. That had been too close for comfort. Breathing rapidly, Holly hastily made her way to the nearest wall away from all the people. Pausing to catch her breath, Holly turned her back against the wall and surveyed the situation from a place of relative safety. She watched the security officer and dog board the train. She saw the two move slowly from one car to the next, and the next, and the next. Meanwhile, the wizard suspiciously eyed the passengers lined up to board the train. After a while, the security guard and dog reappeared. He gave a nod to the wizard, and the wizard turned to inspect the train tickets of the first passenger waiting to board. Venturing a glance at Roland, Holly saw he was still watching the train car, with a worried frown on his face. Holly turned her attention to the rest of the station. The security official with the dog moved back through the gate and over to the line of people waiting to buy tickets. Another stood at the entrance of the station. A third security official stood off to one corner watching all the passengers both coming and going. Though alert, none of the three seemed to display any unusual expressions of anticipation. They didn't look like they were expecting anyone in particular. Holly looked again at Roland. He was still frowning and staring intently at the train, but occasionally he glanced around the whole station before returning his gaze at the train. Wizard Pilkington had seemed fairly nice, although he was working in security. Perhaps Roland was still nice on the inside, too. Maybe that was why he hadn't turned her in. Maybe there was some other reason. Holly considered slipping into the loo to take off her invisibility cloak, but decided it was too risky. Though Roland's eyes were focused mainly on the train, she couldn't risk him glancing the other way at the wrong time and seeing her again. She didn't know why he hadn't turned her in, but didn't want to give him a second opportunity to see her and possibly call attention to her presence to the others. Holly waited until the security official with the dog made the walk around the passengers buying tickets. Then she began to move cautiously forward. She decided the entrance gate was wide enough that she could slip past the guard without his detecting her presence. Step by step, she carefully walked, all the while looking both front and behind to make sure no one accidentally bumped into her as she moved. About halfway to the entrance, Holly noticed a rather large flat box sitting on the ground to one side of the security guard. It was prominently labeled, "Lost and Found." Within that box was a single brown paper bag. It looked like a common lunch bag. Written plainly on the bag in large, thick black ink were the letters YCLF. YCLF, thought Holly as she walked. What a strange name. However did one pronounce a name like that? Wycliffe? Holly froze mid-step. Had she just read the word Wycliffe? Holly stared at the bag in disbelief. It couldn't be. No one knew her name here. No, that wasn't right. Holly had told her name to one person, and he hadn't believed her. But that was the same person Holly had told she wanted to get to London. Here she was in London, and here it was. Could the bag be meant for her? A heavy cough sounded loudly in Holly's ear, bringing Holly to her senses. She scurried to one side in time to avoid being bumped into by a heavy-set middle-aged man walking up swiftly behind her. Holly returned her attention to the bag. Beside the letters, she saw a small green blotch on it. Holly moved cautiously closer. There was no mistaking the spiky points of a green holly leaf crudely drawn over the letters. This bag was definitely intended for Holly. But why? Was it a trap? Holly sat down against the wall next to the bag. She had to think this thing through and decide what to do. She glanced warily over at Roland as she pondered the situation. Roland was looking her way with that frown on his face. Then his gaze returned to the train cars. Wizard Pilkington had been sincere when he told Holly he wanted to help her. Yet he had stood aside and done nothing when Wizard Flint hauled her off to Azkaban prison. Of course, Holly had no idea what he could have done to help her at that point. Wizard Pilkington surely knew Holly had escaped. Wouldn't he have told them everything he had learned about her in order to assist in her recapture? The Muggle news alerts had not mentioned Holly by name, or that she might be headed for London. For that matter, the people at Wizard Security did not seem to know either, or the ones in London would have been more watchful looking for her. That would imply Wizard Pilkington had not told the other wizards what she had said to him. Was that possible? Holly thought about her conversation with Wizard Pilkington. He had assured Holly he wouldn't pass on anything she said unless— how had he put it? Oh, yes. Unless a superior directly asked him to relate it. Wizard Pilkington had spoken truly when he said it, and Holly had thought it a rather weird wording at the time. Maybe his words were more significant than she had thought. Judging from the way he had given orders after barging in to take Holly, Wizard Flint, despite his youth, was clearly Wizard Pilkington's superior. While Wizard Pilkington had been totally respectful in appearance, Holly knew he had not liked Wizard Flint, nor did she, for that matter. After her escape, would Wizard Flint directly ask Wizard Pilkington for more information? Probably not. Wizard Flint was too sure of himself to think Wizard Pilkington might know more than he. Holly could easily understand why Wizard Pilkington would not voluntarily give Wizard Flint any helpful information. Perhaps that explained why no one else seemed to know she was headed towards London. Wait a minute. Wizard Pilkington must have told someone, because someone else knew. Someone had been at the London station watching for her. Roland had recognized Holly immediately. There had been no surprise at her arrival. He had been expecting it. Not only that, there had been no uncertainty in his recognition either, despite the change in hair color. Wizard Pilkington must have told him about her hair. He had to have known Holly had blonde hair. The Layla Pilkington Holly knew was a Ravenclaw. Holly was sure her dad was a Ravenclaw too, or would have been, were there such a thing. He had surely noticed the brown shoe polishes Ravinda had done, and recognized what it meant. But why tell Roland? Roland was younger than Wizard Pilkington. Despite the uniform, Roland's emotions were not that of a Slytherin, which made him a non. There was no way Roland could be a superior to Wizard Pilkington, so why had Wizard Pilkington confided in Roland? Holly sighed. She wished she knew more about how the wizard world worked here. She looked up at Roland. His eyes were again looking towards her. No, not at her. She was still wearing her invisibility cloak. Roland's eyes were fixed on the bag in the box next to her. He knew about the bag. Of course, Holly thought jubilantly. Wizard Pilkington needed someone to bring the bag. That could explain Roland's silence, too. Holly leaned back, pleased with her conclusion, happy to think Roland might not be the enemy, even though he wore a security uniform. But it was still only a guess. Holly watched Roland carefully. When his eyes flicked back to the train car, Holly quietly scooted herself to the edge of the lost and found box. Then she looked around to see if anyone else was watching. When all seemed clear, Holly cautiously poked her hand out of the invisibility cloak. She quickly plucked the lettered paper bag out of the box and swiftly drew it back beneath her cloak where it would be invisible too. Nothing happened. No one seemed to have noticed what she had done. Holly leaned against the wall. She watched and waited. After a while, Roland's eyes again returned to the bag, or rather, the box where the bag had been. If possible, his frown deepened. His head turned back and forth, and he looked all around intently. His features were creased in disappointment. More importantly, Roland did not talk to the wizard standing next to him. Holly remained seated beside the box until Roland finally returned his gaze to the train. Then Holly quietly stood up and carefully walked towards the exit. She longed to stay and try to talk to Roland, but not with a Slytherin nearby. Besides, she wanted to find out what was in the bag, and that could not be done safely in the station. Once outside, Holly ducked around a corner and removed her invisibility cloak. Again, she could feel the emotions around her. Her wakened senses felt like a breath of fresh air. She could sense no other wizards and no eager anticipation of someone lying in wait. Relieved, Holly carefully tucked her cloak underneath her pink t-shirt. Next, she stuffed the paper bag under her blue sweatshirt, just in case someone else was watching for it. Though the bag was small, it was a bit heavy and rather bulky, but by clamping her arms to her sides, Holly was able to keep the bag secure, preventing it from sliding out from under her sweatshirt. Then she joined the other passengers leaving the station. Following the examples of the others, Holly kept her head down as she shuffled past the security officer with the guard dog and through the outer gate. Holly followed the other passengers walking down the sidewalk, keeping careful pace with their speed. She breathed a major sigh of relief when she rounded the first corner. After another block, Holly left the main group and kept on walking, turning frequently down one alley and then another, twisting and turning as Ravenda had taught her, trying to keep out of the possible paths of flying security. She saw a few security officials flying across the more major streets, but they never took her route, and were clearly not searching for anyone in particular. Finally, Holly found an empty alley she judged far enough away from the station and any wizard eyes that might linger there. Holly brushed aside the trash on the sidewalk before sitting beside a dirty blue dumpster. Then she pulled out the bag. It still looked and felt like an ordinary brown paper bag. Grabbing it by the bottom fold on one side, Holly held the bag from her as far away as possible and gently tipped it over, spilling out its contents. She was fairly certain the bag and whatever it contained was harmless, but it never hurt to be careful. The first thing that slid out of the bag was a clear plastic bottle that Holly instantly recognized. Water! When Holly saw that, she threw all caution aside, dropping the bag on the sidewalk in her haste to get the bottle. She eagerly picked up the water bottle, broke open the seal, and unscrewed the cap. Then Holly took a long drink of water. It had been ages since she'd had a chance to take a proper drink of water. Ravenda had warned Holly that the water in the washrooms got you sick if you drank it. It was one of the measures instituted by security as part of their effort to keep track of the homeless, a breeding ground, they claimed, for terrorists and terrorist sympathizers. Desperately thirsty one day, Ravenda had tried the tap water. She had afterwards lain hidden for 3 days in the closed side of a dumpster, seized by horrible cramps, before the effects of the water wore off. Safe drinking water could be had for free at the shelters and the hospital, both places frequently inspected by security. Fountains bearing the security insignia of a V also had safe drinking water. They were usually found in tourist locations, and always within sight of security patrols. Ravenda suspected some of the residents on the outskirts of town with private water sources had safe drinking water also, but those places were well guarded with walls and dogs. Ravenda always kept an eye out for discarded water bottles with water still within to drink, and otherwise pretty much drank rain and gutter water. Gutter water, she told Holly, tasted a lot like dirt and oil, but had never made her sick. After Ravenda's water stories, Holly had been afraid to approach anything wet. Holly leaned back against the dumpster with a happy sigh. Never had a sip of water tasted so sweet. Feeling much refreshed, she now curiously regarded the other item that slid out of the bag. It was fairly thick and wrapped in shiny brown paper. Looking at it, Holly realized she recognized the paper as the same kind Wizard Pilkington had used to wrap Wizard Flint's sandwich earlier that day. Food, thought Holly eagerly. It had been ages since she had last eaten, before sunrise to be exact. A few small pieces of chocolate were no substitute for a real meal. Holly picked up the wrapped item that she was now sure was a sandwich. She found an edge of the paper and began ripping. The warm scent of fresh roast beef immediately filled the air. No, moaned Holly in dismay, not that. The last time she had smelled roast beef had been in the security transport. Holly had been strapped securely in the prisoner's chair. Wizard Flint had taken the opportunity to strike her several times as soon as the transport had taken off. He used some automatic transport features so he did not have to navigate. The force of his blows had been so hard that the transport itself had rattled back and forth after every swing. Just warming up, Wizard Flint told Holly maliciously as he struck, not even bothering to ask any questions. Then the wizard announced he was ready to eat lunch. Actually, he had hurt his wrist on that last blow, but Holly was in no condition to correct him. Her head was spinning and she couldn't think, could barely breathe after all those blows. Wizard Flint seated himself directly in front of Holly's bleary eyes, where she would have an unobstructed view, and slowly began to unwrap the sandwich. Despite her pain, Holly had felt immediate nausea the moment she caught scent of the roast beef. She tried to pull away from the smell, but couldn't, being strapped in. Next, she tried to tell the wizard about being sick, but he hadn't understood her, not at first. Then he hadn't believed her, and instead seized her chin, holding it in place while he waved the sandwich right under her nose. "You're not really sick, are you?" he taunted in a whisper. "I am, I swear," Holly managed to stammer, amid the waves of nausea overcoming her. Wizard Flint drew in closer so they were nose to nose, eye to eye. "Wrong That's when Holly lost control and let loose, emptying out the full contents of her stomach. Once Wizard Flint got over his surprise and disgust, his anger was indescribable. Holly tried to apologize, but it fell on deaf ears. Without hesitation, Wizard Flint caused the transport to stop, pulled out his wand and unstrapped Holly. Then he physically dragged Holly from the chair and out the transport. Holly was too frightened to struggle. The fresh air outside the transport brought Holly back to her senses. The bite had been a pure reflex action. Holly had only been trying to distract the wizard, to get him to loosen his painful grip on her arm. Sheer panic lent strength to her legs when she swung that kick. Holly knew Wizard Flint was about to do something to her, something awful, and she was afraid she wouldn't even live to see Azkaban prison. Breaking the wand had been an afterthought, insurance that Wizard Flint wouldn't kill her when he caught her. Holly never expected that she might actually make good her escape. Holly's stomach rumbled loudly. Smelling that roast beef had brought back those awful memories of the security transport and feelings of terror, but not, Holly suddenly discovered, a sense of nausea. Not that there was anything left in her stomach, but that had never stopped the nausea before. Was that possible? Holly closed her eyes and lifted the sandwich tentatively to her lips. Again she saw the fury in Wizard Flint's face and felt her own terror. "I'll show you," Wizard Flint had snarled as he lifted her out of the chair. Holly took a small bite. "How dare you puke on me?" Wizard Flint spat angrily, his face contorted in pure malice. Holly took another bite. She again felt herself moving to the open door, filled with conflicting emotions of her own fear and Flint's desire for revenge. And another bite. Holly could see Wizard Flint's horrid face in her mind, dripping with vomit. It would have been funny had she not been so scared. Another bite. She saw Wizard Flint's blue eyes flashing angrily at her while he tried to wipe the vomit from his face. Pure hunger kept Holly taking bite after bite of the sandwich. With each bite, Holly saw Wizard Flint's angry face and heard his threatening words again and again in her mind, filling her with terror. Before she realized it, the sandwich was gone, and Holly's growling stomach had quieted. Holly took another drink of water as she considered the miracle that had just occurred. Certainly Wizard Flint's face, as scary as it was much better than a plain load of burnt bodies. But would it work for food other than roast beef? Holly didn't know. She'd worry about that later. For the moment, however, she was content to relax a bit and appreciate the sensation of her full stomach. After a minute or two, Holly's attention was again returned to the bag. Was there anything else in it that hadn't fallen out? She picked it up carefully and looked inside. There was something stuck to the bottom of the bag. Holly reached in and pulled it out. It was a small piece of folded parchment paper. She carefully unfolded the paper and found 2 10-pound notes within. They were cleaner than the one Ravenda had given her, but still bore the distinctive V of the current currency and felt nasty to touch. Holly fingered the money thoughtfully before shoving it into her pocket for later use. Then she shook out the bag, looking for anything else she might have missed. Finding nothing, Holly examined the parchment that had held the money, looking for messages of any kind, but saw none. Certain there must be more, Holly ripped open the bag and held it to the sky, looking for hidden messages, but saw only the holly leaf and the cryptic YCLF. Holly next re-examined the roast beef sandwich wrapper, looking for anything else of interest. Finding nothing else, Holly was forced to conclude the bag held no more secrets. Disappointed, she crumpled the bag, wrapper, and parchment together. Then Holly stood and carefully buried the bundle beneath the other trash in the dumpster. Finishing the water, Holly tossed that bottle on top of the trash. Then she pulled out one of the 10-pound notes from her pocket. Holly knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. She left the alley and turned onto one of the busier streets. Waving her 10-pound note in plain sight to show she could pay, Holly flagged down a taxicab.